Today's edition of Mac Voices is supported by MacVoices Magazine, our free Flipboard magazine that brings you some of the best Mac, iPhone, and iPad productivity tips on the web. High in signal, low in noise, just like Mac Voices, MacVoices Magazine includes information on how you can get more out of your Apple technology. Subscribe at macvoices.com/magazine or search for MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard. And by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter to stay up to date on all the MacVoices news. Subscribe from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Welcome back to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it'll surprise no one at all that the folks at Take Control are on top of all of the news and software releases and everything that's going on, and it seems like we're having quite a flurry here. This time around, though, we get to talk to Mr. Josh Centers. He's the author of the brand new iOS 10, a Take Control crash course. Josh, it's great to have you, and I always get the things messed up. I'm sorry.
Well, so do I. Thanks for having me back, Chuck.
Yeah, so this is a crash course, and for the folks that don't know, I'm going to let you explain what the crash course format is before we actually dig into iOS 10.
So the crash course format is different from the regular Take Control format in that it's kind of like a magazine. It's more visual. It's a two-column format. The left-hand column is all text. The right-hand column is screenshots and sidebars. And so it's a bit more browsable. It's a bit more visual than a usual Take Control book. I mean, they're all pretty browsable and visual, but these more so. And I really packed the screenshots into this one. It was actually a challenge to get it under the file size limits because I've got some of these screenshots in here. And just a little production note, this is my first iOS crash course where we use Retina drop buttons. You know, those little buttons we have in the text itself that show you the buttons and other things you have to tap on the interface. Well, those are all Retina quality now. So in the past, they were kind of blocky and chunky, look like something from an old Nintendo. Now they're super crisp and super clear, and I'm super happy about that.
Yeah, you always want to keep that quality thing going whenever possible. So I love the Take Control crash courses because, not that I don't love the other Take Control books. I like them both. They're just different approaches to topics. And with iOS 10, this feels like a really good choice because there are a lot of us that are familiar with iOS. We don't need to go through all the details. We sort of need to know what's new, what's cool, what has changed, and so we can take advantage of it. Is that a pretty fair assessment?
Yeah, and actually we spend, it's not quite the first chapter, but very early in the book, we have a chapter called What's New in iOS 10. And I forget the exact numbers, but this chapter, I've been doing this since iOS 8, and it gets bigger every year. I think it's up to 8 pages or so now. Yeah, so it's a lot of new features in here, and we try to list off every single one that we're aware of before launch date. And there is so much here, just so much here. And it's one of those things, you know, when you first saw iOS 10 announced, maybe you thought, it's not that much stuff. But, you know, as always is the case with iOS, even if it seems like a minor update, you get to it and it's like, whoa, there's a lot here. And I think there's more in iOS 10 than there has been probably since iOS 7, especially on the user-facing end.
Yeah, and it's tough because the thing that's important to you may not be important to me, and the thing that neither one of us care about may be critical to a viewer or watcher or reader. So how do you decide what to focus on in the crash courses, since the whole idea of a crash course is to be a crash course, kind of get folks up to speed quickly?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, you know, there are certain things in iOS 10 that scratch my own pet peeves that I don't talk about too much, although I do mention them. Like, for instance, my bigged pet peeve in iOS this whole time has been in an email thread. It doesn't show the messages you sent. It just showed the ones you receive. Like if you use Gmail, you know, it shows every message, yours, theirs, whatever. Now in iOS 10 in Mail, it shows all of those. I mentioned that, but I don't go into great detail. One thing that does get mentioned, because it has to be, but it scratches another pet peeve of mine, is that Mail, contacts, and calendars are now individual settings instead of just being one gigantic, messy super setting. Where it comes to the stuff I really focus on and decide to really hone in on, I base it on what's going to confuse people. And like for instance, a lot of the new lock screen stuff I think will confuse people in iOS 10. The messages stuff is a lot of fun, but it could confuse people if they're not expecting all this stuff. And also, I try to focus on what's cool. And two things we did for this book in particular, we added actually, well, back in the iOS 8 book, we had two chapters for messaging. We merged those back together for iOS 9, and now in iOS 10, we've put it back to two chapters. One chapter focusing on the basics of messages. If you're just getting started, the basics, how to send them, how to send voice messages, things like that. And then a whole other chapter just on all the new features, because there's so many new features in messages. And then we replaced the chapter on the health app, which I don't think is used very often and wasn't very much fun to write about, with a chapter on Home, the new HomeKit control app. Because I get so many requests, Josh, why don't you write something about HomeKit? And I write the Apple TV book too, and so readers of that also want to hear about how that works with HomeKit. And so now with iOS 10 and this new Home app, I feel like they're finally taking that side of things seriously. It's finally getting some traction. So I said to myself, okay, now's the time to invest in this. Now's the time to actually, dig in and learn about it. And so I'm very proud of that Home chapter, because we really go through the whole thing top to bottom.
It's an interesting situation with iOS, and I think it's more so than we see with macOS, that these kind of updates bring along with them a lot of updates to the individual applications, as opposed to just the operating system of the phone itself. You've mentioned changes to messages and changes to the Home application and changes to Mail, and so it's not quite a whole new environment, because there's a lot of familiarity here, but there are a lot of new features even in the individual applications themselves.
Oh yeah, it's there's a lot of stuff there, and unfortunately, I couldn't cover every little thing in the book. I kind of glance over news and music. Well, music could probably use a whole book on its own, to be honest with you. But yeah, both of those apps are greatly improved. They have this new big bold text kind of look now. They're a lot faster. They're a lot easier to navigate. Probably the most improved app of them all is Maps, because they've totally redesigned Maps. There's now a persistent search bar on the screen. There's a little slider under the search bar where you can see your recent searches, recent locations, and things. While you're navigating, you can now pan around the map. It always drove me nuts because it was always just locked into place. Now you can actually kind of peek ahead and see what's coming up. You can even add secondary stops while you're navigating in Maps. So if you need to stop at a gas station or somewhere and you don't want to mess up your navigation, you can just tell, okay, add a gas station, and it'll pop that in there, and then you pull in there, and then once you leave the gas station, it tells you, how to get back to your main destination. Another really cool thing, I haven't got this to work myself yet personally, but my publisher, Adam Inks, has got to work a few times. It's what I call Find My Car. I don't think that's what Apple calls it, but if you have some sort of Bluetooth or CarPlay device in your car that your iPhone links up with, once you drive somewhere, you get out of your car, and it'll mark your car's location on the map. It'll send you a notification for it, and then if you open Maps, it'll have your car's location in the parking lot on Maps.
Josh, let's tap into messages for just a second for me.
Okay.
There's so much here, it seems, and I seem to be seeing so many people talk about messages and the changes, and now we have sticker packs and a lot of things that, some of this stuff has been shown off in the keynotes by Apple, but talk about it, I guess, from a real-world implementation standpoint. Is this all just fluff, or is there something here that we should be paying attention to?
It's 100% fluff.
Well, I didn't expect that one, Josh.
Well, there's very clearly a business reason for Apple to add these. Well, let me kind of break things out here, because there's so much going on. We could do a whole show just on this messages stuff. There's so much there. So there's some new emoji things. It'll suggest emojis to you as you type. If you type a message, switch to the emoji keyboard, it will suggest emojis. That's just the start. Then there's also, you can do handwritten notes. There's a button for that. Actually, by default, if you turn your iPhone into landscape mode, it'll come up with this handwriting screen. You can either write a note yourself, or they have little pre-written ones. My handwriting is atrocious, so the pre-written ones work better for me. They've added the digital touch messaging features from the Apple Watch. So you can do things like send heartbeats and do little drawings and stuff like that. And they actually added a video mode to this. This is where video messaging has moved to. And it's pretty cool because you can take like a quick 10-second video and put hearts and fireballs and stuff on it as you take the video. Then there's these bubble and screen effects. These are probably the ones most people think of when they think of the new stuff in messages. Things where the bubble, the message bubble, you can have it just slam down onto the screen, or you can have confetti or fireworks or something fill up the screen in messages. And then there's something they call tap back. And what that is it's kind of like in Slack where you can tag a message, and essentially you tap and hold on a message and you get little emoticons you can tag the message with. So instead of saying lol all the time like I do, like a moron, you can just tap back a message and tap haha, and they get a notification for that, and it makes things a little cleaner. So the big thing, though, the thing that's really kind of taking off and blowing up and everyone's talking about are these new, what they call Messages apps. And there's actually Messages itself now has its own app store. And of course, they're really plugins. And if you install, like, let's say IMDb, which has a Messages app, if you install the main app, it will, if you choose to do so, it will install that Messages app. Really, it's a plugin for you. And these are anything from the open table one is actually really cool. It's not just total fluff. You can choose, and if you open the open table iMessage app, you can choose some restaurants, send that list to a friend or friends, and if they have the app, they can also vote on which restaurants they want to go to, and that way you can figure out where you want to make reservations. Square Cash has a Messages app where you can send people money through iMessage, which is pretty cool. But so far, most of the really popular apps are what they call stickers. And what a sticker is it's sort of like an emoji. You can tap it to insert it into a message. But the other thing you can do with a sticker is you can press and hold it, and it will actually lift up off the screen like a sticker, and then you can drag it. You can actually drop it onto another message or onto another sticker. Like, for example, Nintendo released a Mario sticker pack. And so one of them is a pipe. You send the pipe, and then there's one of Mario sitting. You can take Mario, drag him on top of the pipe, sit him down there, put the little question block over his head if you want. And you can do this. It's kind of fun to experiment with. For instance, if somebody sends you like a picture of somebody, like I have a Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton sticker pack. So I can take like Donald Trump's face and slap it over someone's face. It's hilarious. It's a great way to troll people.
Okay. So it doesn't sound like this is total fluff, and I'm intrigued by the way messages are evolving. I mean, first we had emoticons, then we kind of graduated to emoji. Now Apple's taking it to another level, and so I feel like we're watching an evolution in messaging as opposed to just the fireworks and all that stuff. I mean, some of that, is fluff, but then you have the open table and those kind of things where you're actually inserting useful things in to your messages, and developers are rethinking messages and what they could do. I like that.
Yeah, and this is stuff that's been big in Asia for a while, actually in China. I forget the name of the app, but there's this messenger app that everyone uses, and you do everything through. And you can do things like decide with your friends where to reserve a table, and then reserve the table inside the app, and just all this really cool stuff. And in some ways, Apple is playing catch up because apps like WhatsApp and Snapchat and some others have had these sorts of stickers and things like this for a while. But I think Apple has really taken the concept mainstream in a way that these other companies haven't, and I think they've kind of leapfrogged them in a lot of ways. having this open API, having the power of the App Store, which is a proven model for doing these things, having these great APIs. And I know a lot of people who aren't even developers who have created their own sticker packs. So these things are relatively easy to make, and people seem to be buying them like hotcakes. So it should help that services category on their next quarterly financial report.
Interesting. We don't want to try to cover the whole book here because, first of all, we can't. There's too much, and second, that would kind of not be the point. But if you
crash course of a crash course,
crash course of a crash course, I like that. Yeah, you took me off with that. Talk a little bit about some of the changes to the home screen and the way you try to educate us about them, because not the home screen, the lock screen.
Lock screen.
Because I think that's something that a lot of us have wanted for a long time. It's been a place that's sort of been off limits, and now all of a sudden it's not anymore.
Right. The lock screen gets a lot of change outside of messages. Probably when you first install iOS 10, probably the first thing you encountered was how different the lock screen is. The swipe to unlock gesture, which has been around since 2007, so critical to Apple at one point it sued Samsung over it, as someone reminded me the other day, is now gone. They've abandoned it because now when you swipe from left to right, it reveals this new widget screen. So you remember in iOS 9, from the home screen, you had this thing called the Siri suggestions screen. It was Spotlight and various pseudo widgets Apple had pre-installed for you, like local places, frequent contacts, stuff like that. Well, someone at Apple had the bright idea, hey, we have all these widgets in the notification center for some reason, and we have this screen full of widgets that we don't let people customize at all. Why don't we just make the widget screen that and let people add whatever they want? And so now you have this widget screen accessible from the lock screen, from the home screen, and even still a notification center. So there's all kinds of neat stuff you can do there. I mean, the widget stuff isn't anything new. It's just easier to access now. If you swipe from right to left, that takes you to the camera. So you no longer have to swipe the little icon up to access the camera. This is all part of Apple making the lock screen more useful. Now, in addition to all that, they also have, if you have a newer phone like a 6S, you have what's called raise to wake, and you can just pick up your phone. You don't have to hit the home screen. You don't have to press the unlock button, anything like that. The screen just turns on. If you want to check your notifications, it's just like with an Apple Watch. You just pick up the phone and look at it. Works pretty well, and actually I think it's a great accessibility move. The other thing they've done is, and I haven't seen a lot of this yet, but I'm sure we will, they've added what they call it's like smart notifications. And so, or rich notifications. And so you can have, let's say you have a drop cam or you have some sort of HomeKit enabled camera. Well, it can send you a notification, like a security camera. So let's say somebody rings your doorbell and the camera kicks on. It can send you a notification showing you a video of who's at your door, and you can look at that directly from your lock screen. Dark Sky has added these sorts of things, so you get a notification for your weather. Oh, it's going to rain in a few minutes. It actually shows you the weather graph and forecast and all that sort of stuff right from the notification itself. And so, because this lock screen is so much more powerful now, Apple's made some changes to how things unlock. So swipe to unlock has gone naturally because that takes you to the widget screen. The other big thing, and this frustrates people with Touch ID devices. So if you don't swipe to unlock now, you use the home button to unlock. So if you don't have Touch ID, you press the home button once, you enter your PIN, unlocks just like before. If you're using Touch ID, it's a little trickier. You first place your thumb over the sensor to unlock the device, and if you look very carefully, there's a little lock icon at the top of the screen. If you place your thumb or whatever over the sensor, it'll say unlocked and then vanish. And at that point, you can press the home button to unlock your screen. Now, the reason Apple did that, there's a way to change this behavior in accessibility settings. You can do it so you press your thumb over the Touch ID and it just takes you to the home screen. But the reason Apple made this change is because there are certain widgets, certain notifications like this that, for security reasons, need you to authenticate. And what would happen before, this is a big problem with the 6S. People were complaining about this constantly. You put your thumb over it, bam, you're right in the home screen. You never even get to see your lock screen notifications. So For instance, if you go to the widget screen, you scroll down, you tap Edit, and it asks you to scan your thumb, you can do that without dumping into the home screen. So you can change that in accessibility settings. I tell you how to do it in the book, but I mean, it's one of those things I'm preaching about. I encourage everyone, try it Apple's way first. Well, you can also, if you practice, you can do the whole thing where if you tap release and just kind of hold it there and it'll open right up. It's a slight muscle memory change. But there's a very real reason Apple made this change. It's not just to annoy you. It's not just to torment you. It's to help make the lock screen itself more powerful.
And again, I think that's something that up to this point has been, it's not a case of it's not useful, but now that we've all grown and matured and learned how the phone works and the things we can do with it, now we've been able to say these are things we'd like to do. Apple has listened and given us a lot of those capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about lock screen. We've talked about messages. What are some of the other favorite things you have that you've covered in the book that you think people really need to be aware of?
See, favorite features. Well, I mentioned my nitpicky favorite features. I really love the Home app. And just to give a quick demo in here, so I do have a Philips Hue bulb, which is HomeKit compatible in here. Well, now I can control it from Control Center thanks to this new Home app. So I just tap a button. Oh, my light's off. Tap it again. I can tap and hold it, and then there's this little slider. I can make it super bright in here. It's fun. This is a video show, so I can show these things off. And then I can drop it back down. So, HomeKit's been around for a while. It's been around since iOS 8. It took until about iOS 9 for any devices to show up. And then, even then, it was just Siri support, basically. Well, now they have this home front end. It looks gorgeous. It works really well. It's not a 100% solution. You still have to use your vendor's app for initial setup and to enter it into HomeKit and all that. But once you do, the Home app and the Control Center widgets are really good. That's another thing about Control Center. It's now split into 3 panes. There's what they call a main panel. There's a media panel for media playback and AirPlay. And then there's a third panel if you have HomeKit devices for home automation. So those are pretty cool things. Another cool thing is you can finally delete most of those Apple junk apps like Tips and Stocks. It's something I learned this week. People apparently really hate the Stocks app. They were like celebrating on Twitter, like deleting the Stocks app. Stocks app isn't the best, but Tips is the one that really grinds my gears because it sends you notifications. And I spend all summer learning these operating systems. So no thanks, I don't need the Tips. But I know how to use the thing. Thank you.
I've never understood that, Josh. You're right. People get really, really militant about this. And the ones that I don't like or don't want to use, I just move either into a folder somewhere on the last screen on my phone. But there's something about the fact that they are just there really incites people to riot.
I think it's a control thing. It's the same reason people got upset about the free U2 album. It didn't matter that it was free. They just didn't want it being pushed on their dadgum device. That's a violation, It's funny how that works. There's a lot of really cool stuff in the keyboard now. I'm not bilingual per se, but one of the cool things is if you enable more than one language, like English and Spanish, and if you're like in the Spanish keyboard, it'd be frustrating because if you were there accidentally because you try to type words in English and just suggest words in Spanish. Well, now Apple is smart enough to know that what language you're trying to speak in, and it will suggest words appropriately. I was actually in the Spanish keyboard accidentally all day one day, and I didn't even realize it. Oh, photos. We got to talk about photos. That's the other big thing.
Okay.
And that's where a lot of the artificial intelligence stuff comes in, and it's very impressive. So Photos isn't radically different, but there's a few significant things they've added. There's this new artificial intelligence kind of thing going on. I think Apple said something, like 3,000 processes or 30,000. They always use these ridiculous numbers, and they talk about how many processes they do in Photos now. But needless to say, your photos are very much endlessly analyzed by Apple on the device. And I think for the cloud stuff, they use this thing called differential privacy, which I cover in the book, which is pretty cool. But the upside of this, the end user thing about this, is that you can search for in the Photos app, you can search for trees, and it will bring up, on my phone, it brings up like oak trees, palm trees. You can search for baby, and it will bring up baby pictures. You can search for water, and it will show you pictures of water. You can search for buildings, cars, dogs, and it will even list different breeds of dogs. It can actually identify different breeds of dogs. Cats, if you're big into cat photos, just search for cats in photos, and it will show that. It's pretty remarkable. The other thing they've added to Photos is facial recognition, which is nothing new if you've used iPhoto, but that's now in Photos for iOS and soon for macOS Sierra. I almost called it OS 10. So there's this new album called People, and it's just like it was in iPhoto. You can identify faces. You can merge different faces. You can give those faces names. Pretty neat feature. There's also a Places album where well, again, this is from iPhoto. It shows a big map, shows your photos on the map. You can see, where all your photos were taken. But the big thing is they used these things, this AI and the facial recognition and the new place stuff, for two big things. There's now a details view for every photo. If you look at the details of a photo, it'll show you who's in the photo. It'll show you where the photo was taken. It will show you related photos. So if you look up like one picture from Christmas 2008, it'll show you the other photos from then. The big thing, though, is this new feature called Memories. And what Memories does, so you take all these photos. If you're like me, you take hundreds of thousands of photos with your iPhone. You never look through them because you can't even remember what you took. There's just too many. So what Apple has done, they've created this thing called Memories. It uses these artificial intelligence features and it does this almost every day, if not every day. It creates these, I guess you call them albums. I prefer to say collections. It creates these collections of photos, and there's a special view for this, and there's a button for it in the menu bar at the bottom. And in Memories, you open one of these up, and it'll be like Christmas 2014, or it'll be us together. And like there's one popped the other day, and it was just pictures of my wife, my child, and myself. The facial recognition was smart enough. Like, oh, here's a picture of Josh with his family. Let's make a memory of that. You'll get memories like, oh, for last weekend, and it'll be one time it was pictures of my son's birthday party we had that weekend. So, and it just assembles these things for you automatically. And what it does also is this is a really neat thing. At the header is a video of all it's like a slideshow of all the photos in that memory. But it doesn't actually create that video until you tap on it, and then it'll be like, okay, downloading, generating, whatever. And the AI actually makes a video that has its own soundtrack, its own font, things like that. I mean, you can adjust these things, but it's pretty good at creating good defaults. And you can export that video, share it with other people. It's just a really neat thing. And if you have kids, if you take a lot of photos, things like that, it's a great way to keep up with that stuff. Because if you're like me, you don't have time to go through all your photos and sort them into albums and star them and add tags and metadata and all that Jeff Carlson kind of stuff. Unless you're really unless you're a disciplined photographer, which I definitely am not, you don't have time for that. Or you don't make time for it. And so it's a really nice feature for things like that. And so one of my tips is check Memories and Photos every day and see what's there. Sometimes Memories makes weird stuff, like, it can be kind of insensitive, or it can put like kind of pictures a little too personal in your memories. For me, I get a lot of screenshots. Like, oh, here's some memories from a year ago, and it's all screenshots of iOS 9. Which I need to clear those out. But you can delete those memories, and then you can also save the ones you like, and so they're always available there. And so, if you go through every day, delete the ones you hate, save the ones you like, you'll build up a nice little collection of memories.
So I'm assuming, I know you've been running the betas for a while now, obviously. Is this has to do with everything that's in your photo library on your iPhone, or is it just, okay, so I have upgraded to iOS 10, so now these things apply going forward?
It's everything.
It's everything. Okay, that's
everything.
interesting.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it brings up stuff from years ago. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So, wow. And this is just kind of random. It's just what the AI thinks is, like you say, your family or your example of last weekend. I mean, it or could be, you know, a trip to the beach. Maybe if it's, I'm guessing. So
yeah, it's done that. It's done that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's semi-random. Although, I mean, there's kind of a pattern. Like usually, if you took some good pictures a year ago, they'll say, "Oh, here's 1 year ago or 2 years ago or something like that," or you know. So it's kind of smart in that regard. The one thing that sort of annoys me with it is there are a lot of photos that, and maybe I can fix this once we have Sierra, but a lot of photos were like, I don't know, for some reason the location data isn't there, even if I took the photos on an iPhone, and so they don't show up in the memories, and that's kind of annoying. You know, I mean, there's a little room for improvement, but when you consider that, you know, this isn't as easy for Apple as it is for Google. It's easy for Google because they collect all your data. They spy on you. Apple goes to ridiculous lengths to protect your privacy. And my understanding is they do all this AI processing just on the device. This is all just done on your device. And when you consider that, and you consider the level of precision it has, that it's incredible. It really is. But yeah, Memories is a great feature. If you're a lazy photographer like me, you know, just check it once a day, just like you would a social media feed. You know, it's kind of like your own personal Instagram. You know, save the stuff you like, delete the stuff you don't, and Apple does 90% of the work of creating those albums for you.
I don't want to go too far down this hole, and we've already gone way down, but I'll ask anyway. So is there a way for me to suggest to the AI things that I like? Like, okay, so maybe I had an interesting trip last weekend, and say, hey, AI, would you please create a last weekend set? Or is it the AI just doing its thing as it does it?
It's pretty much automated. Now there are so I was talking about those related pictures earlier. So yeah, you can create a memory. Here's how. It's not manual. You can't really add your own photos. But if you look at, like, say, a picture from the beach, and you look at the details view, and you look down at the related photos, so the related photos have the look of a memory. Like the album icon looks like a memory. You tap on it, it looks like a memory. You scroll on the bottom, you can save it as a memory. It's like a proto memory. And so if you browse enough of these, and this is another neat AI trick, it seems to endlessly generate these sets of related photos that are related for one reason or the other. So if you're really obsessive with creating a lot of memories, you can, you know, go through your photo library and just kind of poke around like your own personal Instagram and do that. And, you know, now you can delete photos in a memory. You can't add your own to it. That's the downside. This is a feature I think will get more refined as they go. But just the stuff they're doing right now, I think is pretty darn impressive. Maybe not impressive if you use Google Photos, but, you know, to me, it's pretty impressive.
Well, and it's on your phone. You know, it's not in the browser. It's on your phone. So
right.
Yeah. Josh, I'm curious. Let's zoom out to a 30,000-foot level. You talked about how, for example, calendars and contacts and all are broken into separate preference panes or preferences now. As we get all this stuff more sophisticated, you know, it's a fascinating balance, and this issue comes up often. How people want more control, yet they complain that they want it to be simpler. And you're really trying to strike that balance. I mean, you can't make things simpler if you want to give that fine-grained control. It's a real problem. How do you think Apple has done in this release of iOS? Because obviously they are adding a lot of new features and different things. Things will come, things will go. We all know that. The AI feature, you know, may become more fine-tunable in future versions. But overall, how do you think they've been able to fare in adding those new features, giving people what they want, yet still keeping it simple enough for people to approach?
Right. Well, it's a good balance. And I think to a degree, these automated things can empower more people. You know, if you're a super nerd and you like to go through, you know, you run Linux on your desktop and you like to, you know, mess with every part of the phone, well, you probably use Android for one thing. But, you know, let's say you're just the average person and you don't know a whole lot about all this computer stuff. You just want to kind of use it for its end use and get on with your day. You know, things like Memories helps you a lot because, yeah, you could always manually create those albums if you had all the time and knowledge and you know, all that. But Now Apple helps you do it, and if you just go in every day and do a couple of taps, the work's pretty much done for you. I think that's greatly empowering. If you want to turn that stuff off and you want to, tell Apple, I guess you could turn off the Photos AI stuff. I haven't even really thought about that, to be honest. But, you can make it pretty much as manual as you wish. And you can ignore memories entirely. You can delete them all if you want. You can still sort your stuff into albums. Nothing's changed about that. You can still manage your own music if you really want to. You can be as much of an iOS power user as you really prefer to be. But I don't think I think Apple thinks practically about this stuff. They think about, how do we help you get more work done? Fiddling with settings and sorting photos and creating music playlists isn't really help. That's a distraction. It's not something that's actually helping you accomplish things. I think that's something Apple nails really well. They strike this balance between, hey, let's do the work for you and give you total control. Because with Apple products, you can get almost all the control you want. If you jailbreak, I guess you can get even more if you're really into that sort of thing. But I think they strike a good balance. I think the way to think about it is a lot of the stuff isn't so much babying people or doing the work for them as it's enabling them. It's helping them to do stuff they wouldn't otherwise do. How many average users, I keep harkening back to photos here, but that's where I think a lot of the AI stuff is. How many users do you think spend time making albums of stuff? Probably not very many, and probably not very often. I don't make them very often. And most of mine are junk/test albums for stuff. So things like this really help people. It really helps people explore photos they probably forgot they took.
And we're harping on the photos, but I love the AI idea that, okay, now it's not just looking at the photos. I can actually do something with them. And it's not just a case of, okay, I'm going to select these 5 photos and then share them to Twitter or to Facebook, that now I can share something just a little bit more refined if I want to. That's very appealing. That's very appealing.
There's a lot of potential in this Apple AI, and I think we're really seeing the future of a lot of stuff in iOS. Well, it started back in iOS 9 with the intelligence features and the calendar notifications, like, hey, you need to leave for your meeting right now. And that stuff's going to grow in iOS, and hopefully they'll even apply it to Siri. That would be great if Siri had some kind of intelligence. But
well, I think you're right, and I'm going to sound like an Apple fanboy, but I don't think Apple. We seem to think that there are times that they leave these gaping holes, and I think those holes are there because they haven't figured out how to do it well enough, reliably enough, and so they just don't do it. And somebody else comes along and, oh yeah, they're cutting edge because they have this, but it only works a small percentage of the time, or it doesn't. You can't count on it. And Siri has had Siri's had its ups and downs, but for the most part, he, she, whatever you believe it is, does a pretty good job. And so I'm like you. I'm hopeful that some of this stuff will continue to evolve and be available to us.
Speaking of Siri, there are a few changes.
Nice segue. Nice segue, Josh.
They're not maybe big changes just immediately, but now developers can finally add their own stuff to Siri. I've been testing this. A lot of apps have been updated with Siri support. So far, it's kind of hit or miss. So let me bring up in the book. I never remember this because there's only a few categories of apps that can integrate with Siri. So messaging apps can, you can say something like, send a text to Chuck using WhatsApp, and I can dictate the text with Siri. There's ride booking. Lyft and Uber now work with Siri, although the Uber app, I tried it with Siri, and it gave me some weird errors and stuff. It doesn't seem to be working 100% yet. Payments, like if you have Square Cash, I can say, hey, send $30 to Chuck using Square Cash. If you have that set up, you can do photo searches like Pinterest. You can say search Pinterest for woodworking photos. There's this voice over IP calling. So you can say, call Chuck on Skype. We could start this whole thing over Siri if we really wanted to. It also works with workouts. So you can say, hey, start my daily workout in Runkeeper or Strava or something like that. And it also integrates with CarPlay. So I don't know. I'm not sure who has CarPlay. It's very few people. But if you have a car, like Honda can make it now, or whoever's selling CarPlay units, they can do stuff like you can say, hey, turn down the temperature, turn up the radio, turn it to my favorite station, whatever. You can do those things with Siri now.
The voice control thing is really just getting started. And I'm anxious for Apple to open that up to other apps so that I can maybe dig in a little more and maybe not just say launch application X, but launch application X and do Y and Z, and have within, meaning Y and Z would be in the app. And I'm hopeful that will come, and I think it will. It's just not there quite yet.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to when Siri becomes conversational. Especially with the AirPods on the horizon. I want something kind of like the movie Her, not quite that far, but where you have these AirPods in your ear, and you can just talk to Siri, and it'll feel like a natural conversation. I think we'll get there. It's just going to take a while. One thing I do want to discuss real quick.
Please.
We touched on it with Siri, and we touched on it with messages, but you're seeing a real platformization. That's a made-up word. I made that up. Of Apple's built-in apps. And I'm starting to understand why Apple has been reluctant to let people delete these apps or to use third parties as defaults, because now they're like creating their own app stores for everything. So you have third-party integrations in messages. There's actually a dedicated app store for messages. Siri has third-party integrations. Photos has had third-party integrations for a while. Even the keyboard has those third-party integrations. That's been around for a while. In iOS 10, now Maps and let's talk about Maps for a second. Maps has this third-party integration. For instance, if you turn on like OpenTable and Uber integrations, so I pull up a map in Nashville, I'll tap one of my favorite restaurants. Beside directions, it has book a table with OpenTable. I can tap that. I can do that all from within the app without having to open anything else. And then when you get directions, there's the typical drive, walk, transit. Now there's a ride-sharing direction option. And so if you have like Lyft and Uber and all these other things installed, you can summon those ride-sharing things directly from Maps if they're so integrated. And they seem pretty quick about getting those in there. So
yeah, I love that, and it's such a logical thing. I mean, up to this point, it's been, oh yeah, great, I've got an app for that. Well, now I have an integration for that, so that if I'm doing A, logically, there's a good chance I'll want to do B or C, and it's right there.
Right.
So I'm with you. I think this is pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is. Well, and as Apple becomes more reliant on services for its growth, then you're going to see more and more of this stuff, because they'll want to sell you an app and everything. So fully expect plugins for mail, notes, whatever in the future. It's coming. It's all coming. You're going to have an in-app purchase for every app on your phone. That's another thing with news. One of the new things in news, you can subscribe to, say, like the Wall Street Journal inside news itself. One other thing I wanted to mention, the other app I forgot is Phone. So the Phone app now can integrate other like third-party voice over IP options. So I haven't seen any yet. Maybe WhatsApp has this. I don't use WhatsApp, but Skype's supposed to have this at some point. So when you get a call on Skype, it'll look like your phone's ringing. When you check your recent call list in Phone, it'll show calls from Skype and WhatsApp and whatever in there also. There's also a new thing in Phone is the voicemail transcription, which I can't get to work, but it looks really cool, and the people I know get it to work. And there's also, they can do spam filters for Phone. Like it'll tell you when your phone's ringing if it thinks it's a telemarketer or not, if you get the right plugin. I haven't seen any of those plugins in the App Store yet, but I'm sure they're on their way.
Yeah, there are a couple apps out there that profess to do it, and I'm most anxious to get that, because I don't know about you, but for some reason I just got a call from Sri Lanka yesterday. Now, I'm sure they're very nice people in Sri Lanka, but I don't know anybody in Sri Lanka or even that I think is anywhere near to going to Sri Lanka. And of course it was junk. And, it's like, leave me alone,
Yeah.
Josh, how about I don't want to end this on a bad note, but on the other hand, anything that I feel it's only fair to ask. We're talking a lot about all the cool stuff, and by the way, I think the plugins or the app stores for different things, what you call it, platformatization.
Yeah,
I think that's great because it's going to let me add the features that I want to add or encourage developers to give me those options rather than having to create a whole app of their own just to give me that one little feature. But anything that you were disappointed in or anything that you think is a pitfall that people need to be aware of?
Not real. Somebody's revving a motorcycle outside or something. Not really. There are a few things that annoy me. For instance, if you have a lot of messages apps installed, which by now I do, some of the interface elements tend to overlap. Like you get so many little dots on the screen where you can scroll between them that it overlaps with the button you use to pick which app you want. It's uncharacteristic of Apple. It's not very refined. I'm sure they'll fix that sooner than later. No, there's nothing that really just stands out. It's a very solid update. I haven't, other than there was a problem with the initial over-the-air update where it was breaking devices, and that lasted about an hour or two, and then Apple fixed it. Other than that, I haven't heard many complaints. Well, I heard one guy hates the health app. He hates how the health app looks now, but he might be the only person who uses the health app on a regular basis. So I can't really comment. I feel terrible for him, if he really hates how the health app is now. But overall, it's a very solid update. It scratches a lot of itches that users have had for a while. It's not totally revolutionary, but you're seeing a lot of groundwork being laid here with the AI stuff, the notification stuff. You kind of see a direction where Apple is going. But no, overall, it's a very good update. And it feels kind of like the end of an arc that started with iOS 7. iOS 7, we saw this new flat interface. iOS 8, we saw extensibility added and, really finally letting developers, get their hooks into iOS and make it easy to share things with those apps. In iOS 9, we saw the introduction of artificial intelligence and just a lot of refinement across the board. And now with iOS 10, we're seeing sort of an evolution away from the iOS 7 model. iOS 7 was very flat, almost to a fault, almost to a point of parity. And with there's a lot more color in iOS 10. There's a lot more depth. There's a lot more definition for things. It feels a little less Johnny Ive parody. It's starting to feel like its own natural kind of thing again. So I think it's moving in a very positive direction design-wise, and we're seeing even more integration. It's funny how Apple resisted third-party integrations for so long, and now they're becoming a core part of everything in iOS, and they're really starting to see it as sort of a future of revenue. Other than just a few bugs, a few overlay things, some of the messages apps are a little on the slow side, especially at first. But yeah, it's a very solid update. I've been very pleased with it. I have to say, the betas over the summer, even from beta 1, ran faster, better battery life. Well, that's not quite true. It took a while for that to catch up, but faster, it performed better generally than the release version of iOS 9. So if you haven't updated yet, you totally should do so if you can, because it's one of Apple's better updates in a long time.
I'd like to offer a tip on how to use Josh's book, because this is the way I've used some of the Crash Course books. Dive into them if there's something you're really interested in. Obviously, hit those chapters first, but sooner or later, hit all the chapters, but only take maybe 1, 2, maybe no more than 3 a day and learn how to do this stuff, because there is so much here. But Josh and the whole Take Control crew in every Crash Course will kind of give you the recipes, if you will, the steps to learn it. And I don't think it's a good idea to try to dive in and say, okay, Saturday, I'm going to go through all of this stuff and I'm going to be an iOS 10 expert, because you won't be. There's too much stuff. You will forget it. So just learn a couple a day. Let Josh teach you with the book, and then you have a good chance in a week, maybe longer after a little practice, of being a lot more of an iOS expert, taking advantage of this stuff and not having them be flash in the pants, because we're all busy. And I get that. I certainly am. And I find that I found features, 4 months later that I think, why didn't I know about this? Well, it's because I didn't take the time. So take a little bit of time, figure out everything that's here. But God, Josh, you've given me a lot to want to play with right off the bat.
It's fun. Well, my own advice for reading my books, not to sound egotistical, but I'm always sending my books to my friends, and they're like, "Oh, I never got a chance to read the thing. I don't have time to read the thing." I try to explain. No, do not. This isn't Shakespeare. You don't read it cover to cover. It's intended for people with no time and no attention span, like myself. So, my advice, start off in the What's New section and just kind of browse through that. And there's links to detailed coverage of this stuff, if there is detailed coverage, and there usually is, so if you're confused by something, you can jump straight to it. If you're confused by the new messages stuff, you might want to read that Fun with Messages chapter, because it explains all of that stuff and how it works. But yeah, I just kind of browse through it. I actually use Take Control books myself, because I actually have access to the whole library. I'm very lucky in that regard. And I use them as reference books. When you get to something in iOS you don't know how to do, or you don't know how that works, crack open the book and search it. And the nice thing, hey, if you use Preview, which you should, and there's an excellent Take Control book on Preview that you could read to get started with that. But if you can just search for this stuff really easily in Preview and usually find the thing you need. And I do that myself. Actually, I had to refer. This is sort of embarrassing, but I couldn't remember how you added photos to an album in the Photos app. It's not the most intuitive interface. I actually had to open my iOS 9 book and remind myself how you do that. So, it's good to know, though. My books are actually useful. I actually can use them myself when I forget these things.
Yeah, you're right. That's a real good point. So we always, at this point, ask the author to tell us about the book. How many pages, how much, that whole thing.
It's, how many pages is in this? Let's see. 143 pages if you include all the boilerplate. And although this is a crash course, so really it's almost double that length when you really think about it. Because a normal Take Control book, it's text, picture, and so even like the bigger, like 200 plus page books like Preview and Numbers and Apple TV, or text, picture, this is text, picture. So 143 roughly times 2 is really about how long it is, because we really cram it in there. It's $15 new, and I believe if you're updating from the iOS 9 book, I think it's $7. And if you signed up if you bought through the Take Control website, you should have already got an email about that. And that should be in your inbox. If you bought through iTunes or Amazon, I don't know what the deal is there. I don't think you get a discount, but maybe if you email us, we can probably help you out with something. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it's funny, because I've had people ask me, why do you keep talking about how many pages are in the book? Is that really important? I personally think it is, because you've got a lot of information here that is packed into relatively few pages when you stop and think about everything that they're trying to cover. So it means that it's been boiled down, it's been explained, condensed, so that you can get up to speed with it quick. So that's why the page numbers are important. And certainly for $15, wow.
Well, the nice thing about this is we've been doing the iOS books since 8 now, and so a lot of the text gets updated between versions, but the stuff that hasn't changed much, we go through and we just refine the heck out of it. And so we're at the point now where I think almost all the rough edges are gone. The instructions are clear across the board, because it's always one of the most frustrating parts of editing these things year to year is I'll get to some section of text, I'm like, oh, well, that hasn't changed, I'll skip that, and I come back, there's all these editorial comments on it, like, well, this isn't why is this like this? Why, so we really do analyze every section of stuff, even the stuff that hasn't changed much, and just polish the heck out of it. So, if you've been following this series from the start, or you picked up with iOS 9, it's worth your $7 to get the new shiny stuff, and especially those Retina drop buttons. I like those a lot. I really think that makes the whole text look a lot better and more professional.
You're really into those buttons, Josh. I like it.
I hated the old ones. The old ones just looked so old and busted, and the Retina ones look so nice. So I'm very happy with those.
Well, hey, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for the time. This is I did it again. This is iOS 10, a Take Control Crash Course by Josh Centers, TakeControlBooks.com. Go get it. Josh, well, I have an idea there's something else coming down the road not too long from now, so we'll be talking about that soon, I think.
All right.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. We'll be back soon. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes, links to subscribe, and to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, SoundCloud, the MacVoices blog, the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter, and on MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard that helps you do more with your Apple tech. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.